What's up everybody? Today we're looking at a super important rule which lots of people get wrong. So the rule we're looking at is rule 20, which is room to tack at an obstruction. So this is a rule which governs when you can ask someone else to get out the way when you're going upwind and you're approaching either a boat on starboard or a wall or some other sort of obstruction that you need to avoid. So let's get right into it and learn what we need to know about this rule. So a boat can hail for room to tack and avoid a boat on the same tack when they're approaching an obstruction. So what that means is when you've got two boats on the same tack, one of these boats, the one who's blocked, can hail for room to tack to avoid an obstruction and to avoid this boat too. So it's asking this boat to get out of the way so they can avoid an obstruction. And what counts as an obstruction? Well, an obstruction is anything which they're going to need a significant change of course to avoid. So there are two main things which this is going to be, which is either a boat on starboard when you're on port. So if the boat on starboard is here, this blue boat 1 can hail for room to tack because they're going to need to make a significant change of course to avoid this boat, and they don't have one escape room open to them. It's blocked by this yellow boat, so they can hail for room to tack to avoid it. The other classic example is if you have a wall coming up. So if you're approaching a wall or a cliff or a tanker or something like that, or shallow water, then once you're close to it, you can hail room to tack, and you're asking this boat to get out of the way so you can keep clear. The other condition you need to satisfy is in order to hail for room to tack, you both need to be on a close hauled course. So you need to be going upwind, you need to have sails tight in, close to the wind. And importantly, one thing which room to tack doesn't apply at is when you're approaching a mark. So if the obstruction in question is a mark that you're going to hit, well, that's just tough luck. You should have been on the ley line. So this rule doesn't apply at a mark, but it applies at all other obstructions where you're going to make A, a significant change of course, and B, when you're sailing, close hauled. So how can you, as the blue boat, make your hail in such a way that you're never going to get penalised and that you never break the rule and you're never in danger of getting protested? Well, there are a few conditions you need to satisfy. So first of all, in rule 20.1, when you make your hail, you have to be in a position where you're going to have to make your substantial change of course soon. So it's going to need to be something where you're close to the wall, let's say, in this situation. So, and we're talking like a couple of boat lengths, maybe 2-3 boat lengths, it would depend. Often this is something that will be published or be discussed in a competitor's briefing, what the acceptable distance is, but you can't be doing it 8 boat lengths away from the wall, and you can't be doing it, if you're doing it 1 boat length away from the wall, then that's also going to be in such a way that you haven't given them time to respond, and we're going to get into that in a second. The other thing you need to do when you make your hail is you need to specifically use 3 words, and these are the only 3 words you can use. You can't use a different language, you can't use any variation, you need to use these 3 words in this order, and those 3 words are room to tack. If you don't say those 3 words, this whole hail isn't valid. They've got no obligation to respond. You have to use those exact 3 words, and that's a change in the 2025 rules of racing. Before, it was phrased in such a way that you could use any phrase or you could use a different language, but now it's been consolidated such that it is exactly those 3 words, and that also means there's more pressure on this boat because, as I said before, this boat only has a duty to respond if you use those words room to tack. Whereas before, if you insinuated anything similar to room to tack, they would have a duty to respond because you're asking in a more general sense for water. So don't say water, don't say I need to tack, don't say it's getting shallow, whatever it is, you have to say room to tack. And as soon as you've done that, those are your conditions satisfied. Now additionally, you also, in some wind conditions, in some places, in some types of boats, you may be required to make an additional signal. So for instance, if you're yachting, you may also need to do hand signals, and that's normally going to be specified in the sailing instructions or the notice of race. But also it's implied that if it's windy or if there's going to be difficulty in communication, you need to make it obvious in some sort of way, beyond just shouting, beyond just hailing, that you need room to tack. And that will normally be some sort of arm signal, gesticulating at the other boat, something that is going to grab their attention. And often this will be specified, as I said, but sometimes it isn't, and in those cases you need to use a little bit of common sense, both as the hailer, and the responder about which way that's going to go in a protest hearing. And this boat needs to not be willfully ignorant. If another boat is using a hand signal, that could form part of their hail. So if you're the windward boat, how should you respond to the blue boat hailing for room to tack? Well, the most important thing is that even if you think that this boat has done it too early, or they've done it and there's actually no obstruction there, it doesn't get shallow in this part of the lake or wherever you're sailing and they're just making something up, or the starboard boat is going to cross them. Even if you think that their hail of room to tack is bogus, you have to respond. That's written in Rule 20.2, you have to respond. And what you can do is you can respond and then protest after responding, and they'll get a penalty for that, and that's how you're going to deal with that problem. But if you don't respond, then you're going to get a penalty, or they'll be able to take you to a protest hearing. It's not a good thing to do. You always need to respond. And there are two ways that you can respond to a boat hailing for room to tack. The first way is you can just tack. And if you tack, then that's going to give them the space they need to do their tack and avoid the obstruction. So that's the first way you can respond. The second way you can respond is by hailing back and saying, and these are the only two words you can use, you tack. And if you say that, you then have to give them room to tack. So for instance, if you shout you tack and they swing their boat very quickly into attack and bump you, that's going to be a penalty on you, not a penalty on them. So the only two responses are saying by tacking or by saying you tack. Now, a scenario where you might say you tack is, for instance, you might think that they've overestimated, they might have overestimated the distance between you or whatever, and think that they're going to hit you and they tack, and you think they're miles away. Just shout you tack, and then they tack and they're behind you, or they say you tack and they're going to cross you. And for instance, that's a very common scenario. We might say you tack is they're just ahead of you, they're just being held, and they hail for room to tack, and it's actually more beneficial for you to say you tack and then give them a little duck on the stern there, and then tacking a second later means that you're going to have a clean lane. So there are reasons tactically why you might do both options, but you need to do one of the options. And after the windward boat has responded, the blue boat then must immediately tack as well. So if they've hailed for room to tack, they then must finish by doing a tack, even if they decide that, actually I don't need it anymore, I think I can actually go an extra 3 boat lengths, I've looked in the water, it looks a long way to the bottom, or whatever happens to be. If you've held for it and they tack off, or they respond, you then have to tack. And you have to tack immediately or promptly. The final scenario for this is that you might also have a couple of boats all racked up, and in this scenario the middle boat might have to pass on a hail from the lower boat, and the lower boat needs to give time for all 3 boats to have passed on the hail and have completed the hail to each other. And so you need to think extra early about when you're going to hail for it if you're in a scenario where you're all stacked up. So a little bit on the tactics from here of what we can do is, as boat 1, what we can do is we can use this to avoid obstructions. We can use it if we've got a boat on starboard. This can be a really good way to take control of our pair, because at the moment, see, we're being locked here. Well, if we call for room to tack, well, now we're the boat in control, we're locking them. So it's a really good way to re-establish control. It's great for changing who's in dominance in a pair. It's also, as the windward boat, a way to maintain control of someone. So if they try this, let's say you're approaching this wall and they hail for room to tack, well, you can hail you tack. And as they tack, you try and do a nice simultaneous tack, get a nice high mode, and even as they come down to close hauled or whatever, you're going to be right there, they're going to be right on your hip. So even though you've done your job of keeping clear, of giving them room to complete their tack, you're now in a controlling position where they are going to slide right off there because they're in a lee bow position, and that's really slow for them. So there are still ways to maintain control even when that bottom boat is requesting for room to tack. Right, well, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you now understand how Rule 20 works. If you've got any questions, leave them down below, and don't forget that if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and look forward to seeing you next time.